Alright everyone, welcome back. Today I've got some more bug news for you. This story came out 3 days ago, I think, from the New York Times. The squishy truth about why you're seeing fewer spotted lanternflies. So, the spotted lanternfly showed up in New York City sometime in 2020, and they did have an explosive invasion of this particular insect. If you are from the Northeast in the United States, or from like the Mid-Atlantic region, you have become extremely familiar with this stupid insect. They reproduce extremely quickly. Each female lays like 100 eggs, and they don't really die off during the winter. They're very cold tolerant. So the populations have gotten very, very high up here, and they cause a ton of damage. They feed on basically everything, particularly trees. They're really, really good at feeding on woody plants, and they have caused just an enormous amount of damage, especially in like Maryland and Pennsylvania. So, like I said, they showed up in New York City in 2020-ish, but they have been in the U.S. probably since 2012. The first invasions were seen in 2014 in Pennsylvania, and they've just been radiating outward ever since, and they are likely to get all over the U.S. But anyway, so after last year's very high population, or the last several years of very high population in New York, people have noticed that the population has really decreased this year. And so they go on about, why this is. Is it that, some people think it's because New Yorkers have been stomping so many of them. And, there have been some other ridiculous things that have been said in this article. But the population has noticeably declined. So why is this? So one of the things that they do point out in this article is that populations an invasive species entering into a new location does go through an immediate boom in the population, and this is true. The populations of invasive insects in an area generally get to an area, start reproducing crazy because they have no natural enemies. They don't really have any pathogens or parasites or predators in the area, and as long as there is some sort of good food supply, they will reproduce beyond the carrying capacity of the environment, and then. So you'll have this huge population, and then the population will suddenly collapse, and you end up with this boom-bust cycle where they reproduce faster, or they reproduce more than there is food to support the population. The population has to decline; they starve out, and that's what I think likely happened here. They say, well, maybe it's climatic conditions, maybe it's natural enemies. The climate up here this year was actually pretty good. I don't think it's climate. Here in Maryland, the population of spotted lanternflies this year was really high. Last year it was a little lower. It was kind of a bust year. This year they've just been absolutely everywhere since the snows thawed, basically. And so it's probably, I think it's this cyclical pattern. They do talk about natural enemies, and they do make a point in that predators, especially long-lived predators, have to learn that these insects are a viable food source. So birds, for instance, if they had never seen spotted lanternflies before, in 2020 when they arrived, they wouldn't have begun feeding on them right away. They wouldn't have known if they were poisonous. They wouldn't know that they were even edible for the most part. At some point, the birds figured out that they are edible, and now they feed on them. And that is because birds are long-lived, they are capable of learning, and many of them are capable of complex communication. So they can figure out that this is a good food source. So that's good. But it's not the predators controlling them. Spotted lanternflies and invasive species in general will only be controlled by predators when the population is very low. Once you get into this, enormous population, you don't get control with predators. So let me teach you some ecology. So let's do a graph. So this is on the x-axis. This is just general pest population, starting at 0, going to as high as you want. This is just a theoretical graph. And on the y-axis is the percent of the population killed by natural enemies. So this is natural enemy control is what we're talking about here. Natural enemy control. How well do natural enemies control a population? And we really have 3 different kinds of natural enemies. We have predators, we have parasitoids, and we have pathogens. And these are the natural enemies of insects, of invasive insects. And really, pathogens can also be climate is kind of has a similar effect as pathogens. If you have an extremely severe climatic change, you can have catastrophic effects on a population. So generally, predators are great at low population levels, but then it kind of tapers off. So as the percentage of the population goes up, or as the population of the pest goes up, the percent of the population that is controlled through predators kind of goes down. So red equals predator. And that is because predators become satiated with whatever they're eating. There's only so many insects a bird can eat. So really, predators are extremely effective at like low to mid ranges, but once the population of a pest gets really, really high, there's just no way that predators can eat enough of the pest in order to control the population. The predator's stomach will explode before they've eaten enough. Parasitoids are a little different. Parasitoids are parasites of, or generally insect parasites of other insects. They will lay their eggs on their host or in their host, and then they hatch and they eat the insect from the inside out. Parasitoids are not great at low populations, but at mid populations, they're really good. And that is because parasitoid populations, being insects, can increase pretty rapidly, and they can kind of grow with the population of the pest. So they will lose effectiveness at some point in that they can't just keep increasing forever. But they are more effective at mid and high ranges than predators are. And unfortunately, right now, we don't know of any parasitoids that are currently controlling, or I shouldn't say we don't know of any. We don't know of any widespread parasitoids that are doing a good job of controlling spotted lanternfly. They're just not present yet. There hasn't been enough research and breeding of them done yet. Pathogens, on the other hand, are kind of terrible at low populations, but once you get to sufficiently high populations, pathogens become very, very good at controlling the population. Let me redo that line. So at low populations, kind of terrible. High populations, really, really good. And that is because they spread, the more densely packed the host population, the better disease spreads. And this is kind of well known by anyone. The more of something there is and the closer they are together, the easier a disease spreads between the individuals. So terrible at a low population, really, really good at a high population, and they can generally wipe out a population if the population gets dense enough. Unfortunately, we don't know of any widespread pathogens of spotted lanternfly that are currently available in the northeastern United States. And part of this is because this is a sap-sucking insect. So here are its legs. This is leg. This is a leg. This is a leg. This thing in the middle here, this is its mouth. So it's a needle-like mouth. This is for piercing and sucking on plants, and they suck the sap out of plants. And generally speaking, sap-sucking insects have a much lower pathogen load on them because of how they eat. Pathogens only have basically two ways into an insect. They can either go through the cuticle, go through the skin, which is very difficult because they have the exoskeleton, or they can go through the mouth. So pathogens generally enter the mouth easier on insects that can chew because they're taking in large chunks of things. Whereas with an insect that sucks sap, unless there is a pathogen in the sap of the tree, they won't ever get a pathogen this way. So we would need to find a pathogen that infects through the skin or through the reproductive system, which is also just the skin, in order to infect or catastrophically infect this insect. Usually this is going to be a fungus. Will do this, but other pathogens have a harder time getting into this kind of insect. Climate, if you have a catastrophic climate event, you will see a collapse in the population. Climate is kind of the ultimate variable here. Generally, insects will tolerate a lot of climates, and then there's some limit where it will just destroy all of the insects, whether it's too hot or too wet, or what have you. So climate is kind of the ultimate control factor. I think what has happened in New York in this case is just that We've had a bust year, as it were. The population grew too fast. It's probably starved out. It's not natural enemies controlling it. It's not people stomping on them. It's just that the population has collapsed. And one of the things that they say in this article is, well, maybe the insect is just integrating into the ecosystem. That's not what happens here. Invasive species don't really integrate into an ecosystem. They get into an ecosystem, overproduce, and generally push out native species. They fill a niche better than a native species would because they don't have any natural enemies. There aren't these tight restrictions, ecosystem restrictions like you see on native species, where you've had this long-standing millions of years to work together sort of thing, where everything fills a certain role and they have strong limitations on what roles or what that role is and how well they can move outside that role. Invasive species don't have that. There's no long-term ecological evolution there. They're just going to be damaging native species. So again, we had a really high population in Maryland. This year, last year it was really low. New York seems to be going through the same thing now. It's probably just a boom bust cycle. So don't get your hopes up next year. It could just be just as bad in New York as it was last year. And with that, I'll talk to you guys later.